Hello and good morning. This is Traders Next Door, and I'm your host, Edgar Kartashabe from Forex Insights SA, and this is the Daily Scoop. We are in FOMC week. The Federal Open Market Committee is having their third last meeting of the year, and it is going to be a doozy. Come Wednesday, 8 p.m. Central African time, we're going to find out if the Feds are going to be cutting rates, and if so, by how much. 25 or 50 basis points. That is the big question in contest here. And it is a little bit unusual that this close to the meeting, we are still very unsure as to how much we are cutting rates. But what is the reason for all this uncertainty? The CME group on FedWatch has priced in about a 1% chance of having a 50 basis point cut. At some points 2 days ago, it was up to 70% of a 50 point basis point cut. A lot of other experts are estimating that we're actually only going to get a 25 basis point cut. So there's a lot of uncertainty as to how much the Fed is planning to cut rates. And the reason being is we are in a weird position where the data has not been absolutely conclusive as to whether or not the Fed is behind the curve or ahead of the curve in terms of cutting rates at this point. Between a softening labor market, a flat CPI, and a miss during NFP, we're in this weird limbo land where things are not yet 100% conclusively clear. As a result, this has had a massive impact on the market. Gold closing in at $2,589 per ounce. You have a massive downtrend on the dollar and the US dollar yield bonds. So the market has been reacting a little bit negatively to this uncertainty as to whether or not the Fed is going to cut rates and by how much. And with retail sales coming out later today, being the only data set left to come out before the Fed's decision comes out, there is potentially a lot of pressure on retail sales to really move the needle one way or the other if the Fed has not yet made its final decision. Minutes from the July FOMC meeting showed that some of the FOMC members wanted to cut rates in July already. So there are some fears that actually maybe July was the right call, and now in September, things are a little bit late. The ECB cut rates in June by 25 basis points after 5 years of a hiking cycle. They cut rates again last week by a further 50 basis points. So we're definitely in rate cutting season. So the fact that the Fed has yet to play their hand and move a definitive step towards it is slightly concerning. But whether the Fed decides to go for the 25 basis point cut or the 50 basis point cut, we are in rate cutting season. The Fed needs to change course, and Powell's delivery on when they change course and why they change course and by how much is going to be vitally important. If we have any signs that the Fed is somewhat worried that they might have been late to the curb, this is going to have a massive impact on how the markets are going to treat it. Whether it be a 50 or a 25, Powell's delivery on the reason behind it is going to be the vitally important piece of the puzzle. What the sentiment of the market based on his release is what's going to really move the market. So if we get a dovish delivery on a 50 basis point cut, we might still have confidence in that the 50 basis point cut just means you're trying to get a jump start on things. You're trying to move rather quickly right now, but they're still confident that they're still going to make their 2% target and things are going to flow nicely towards that soft landing. If we get a hawkish 25, like, listen, we're only doing this by 25, but we are quite concerned about the state of the economy and where things are going, then that could still spook the market, even though it's a smaller cut. So his delivery, Powell's delivery on why they're doing what they're doing is almost more important than what they end up doing at all. So It's all trying to see if whether or not that soft landing that Fed has been speaking about at all the previous meetings thus far, if that soft landing is actually in sight, or are things going to go a little bit pear-shaped, be a little bit rocky during that landing. The bond market, they are pricing in a further 5 rate cuts for this year alone. So the bond market really does give you the conclusion, give you the feeling that they feel like we're a little bit behind and we're going to need to cut rates rather quickly to catch up to where we need to be. You also see that because of this, where the Fed is in a sort of rocky spot. So their delivery on the events are going to be absolutely vitally important, because the market does suspect that we might be a little bit late, and that is going to have some massive consequences on the markets if we are. But looking long term, and if we look further back in history to where we are now, what is it going to mean? Like, what are all these data sets going to mean? Because quite interestingly, if we look back to 2007, to what the state of the economy was back then versus now, there are some worrying correlations between what happened just before the global financial crisis and where things are right now. If we look at the unemployment rate in the US, both sitting at 4.2%. The 4.2% now being a new high set after the decline that happened during CoV, the virus that should not be named on YouTube. So, and it has a disturbing uptrend to where it's landed at the 4.2% right now. Inflation was both at 2.5%, both in 2007 and today. Home sales are slightly worse than they were in 2007. The economic activity is about the same. So there are some disturbing correlations between where we were just before that financial crisis and where we are today. So we're hitting rate cuts, coincidentally, on the exact same day, 18th of September, 2007 versus now in 2024. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this is going to play out long term. There have been fears of a recession over the last few months, and where the data is suggests that it is possible for a recession to come. Some key differences, however, is the fact that this is an election year. So whether you get Donald Trump into office or Kamala Harris into office, either way, we are getting a new president into office this year. That does also bode an effect on how things are going to play out. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the Fed's decision ends up being, whether that 25 or 50 basis point cut. But most importantly, it's most important to pay attention to the wording and the delivery of that cut. So I suggest watching the event, really paying attention to how Powell's delivery is, what are the reasons and rationale behind each of the cuts, whether we get the 25 or the 50, and that is going to really give you the clue as to how the markets are going to respond. Because right now, either rate cut option seems good on paper, but it all depends on what information the Fed has that we don't. Are they ahead of the curve? Are they behind the curve? Are we in for that soft landing, avoiding a recession, or are things going to be bumpy in the near future? This is left to be seen, so we're going to eagerly await for retail sales later today and FOMC tomorrow, 8 o'clock Central African Time, PM, and that is really going to determine how the market is going to look like, both in the short term as the announcement happens and in the long term in terms of the trend the US dollar is going to make. So if you are a trader, this is a very, very exciting time. Rate cut seasons do not happen very often. This has not happened since 2020. So it is going to be really interesting to see how the market is going to respond, and if and when some big moves happen, are you going to be able to catch them? If you are looking to capitalize on the big moves that we're about to make, you can get yourself a Vault Funder account, get 35% off with code FISA in the corner of your screen. Link will be in the description down below. I have been Edgar Katashabe. This has been Traders Next Door, and you have just heard the Daily Scoop.